Welcome to Maine, we're stretched to the bone. Prices keep rising, the paycheck stays prone. Inflation keeps knocking, won't leave us alone. They're selling the lie, groceries climbing, the gas tank is low. The bill's hitting harder than snow, but silence still blankets the truth. Where does it go? They're selling the lie. Housing is gridlocked from Portland to the county. Workers commute far past what feels soundly. Talk of solution comes yearly, not loudly. They're selling the lie. They're selling the lie. Say every voice counts, but watch who gets lifted. Some stories vanish, some get the spotlight shifted. Depends on what trends and what keeps them gifted. They're selling the lie. I won't believe them, I wanna believe, but truth's always stuck in between. Static and spin, drown the signal again. Nothing is what it seems. I wanna believe you, but every headline turns daylight into redesigned skies. Facts get twisted, context missing. We choke on the simplified alibis. Wanna believe you, but all I see is shadows where the answer should shine. The fact is fiction, conviction.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters Podcast, where Mainers tell their stories.
Good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters Podcast. And I am your host. The Muddy Waters Podcast exists, as always, to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state by interviewing people and talking to people who are seeing what's happening on the ground, either from their own perspective or wonderful reporters like John Fetherston of the Maine Wire. Thank you once again for joining us on what we're calling Unfiltered with John Fetherston.
I like it.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on, obviously in Maine politics. What are some of the highlights from what you've been working on the ground recently?
Well, you know, Graham Platner and Janet Mills are the gift that keep on giving. You know, it's fascinating to me that somebody like Platner, with as much baggage as he has, is still beating, you know, a two-time incumbent governor by, in some polls, 30%. That is fascinating to me. The Maine Legislature is maybe one of the most dysfunctional organizations that I've seen in a long, long time. So we can talk a little bit about that. And, you know, I mean, I think, you know, even though it's a world thing, it does have impacts on Maine, especially with energy prices. But, you know, President Trump's declaring that he's going to, you know, today at 8 p.m. Eastern time, if they don't reach a deal in Iran, that the world could look like a different place tomorrow morning, as he has vowed to blow up all of their nuclear power plants and all of their bridge infrastructure. So, I mean, I don't know, you know, this could be an interesting time. Where do you want to start? I mean, and, you know, gas prices went up 10 to 15 cents per gallon last night just because of this. So, I mean, that does have big impacts on people in Maine. So price of oil is barrel of oil is almost doubled from this time last year. So, I mean, it is a concern.
Yeah, no, it definitely, you know, it's interesting. Like, you know, your I think X handle is like all politics is local.
Yep.
You know, and in this podcast, we really heavily try to talk about what's going on in Maine, but, you know, and I think that, like, when we talk about Maine politics and what we can do, like, the most significant thing that we can do is what's happening locally. And so I think there needs to be a focus there, but, you know, it's not untrue that, you know, like, this is having a substantial impact on things locally, because when you drive up the cost of energy, especially in a state like Maine, where because of the Mills administration and stuff that they've done, They've made energy even more expensive. So then when you add to the already expensive energy costs that we're dealing with here in the state of Maine, I mean that's going to have a significant material impact on the lives of the people here in the state of Maine. And I think one of the other parts of that, since we're starting here, and I don't want to spend too much time on Trump, but
Sure.
there is an impact on the reality of the fact that most people are making their decision about who they're going to vote on for everything, if they're going to show up and vote, based on what's happening in Washington, D.C. and what Trump is doing. And one of the concerns as a conservative here in the state of Maine is we already are up against it. He lost Maine, being again one of the best policy presidents. I think the best policy president. I don't know. I'm not in love with what's going on in Iran, not because I don't want the Iranian people to be set free from a horrific government, but there are some elements around it and the timing of it, as well as the national deficit and the fact that how it impacts Americans, that has me concerned. But that aside, right, going into this presidency, he was the best policy president we'd had in my lifetime, and probably going a long ways back. But he was running against the worst presidential candidate in U.S. history. People who watch this podcast are like, "Yeah, we've heard you say that before, Chuck." And he still lost Maine by 6.5%, though, right? And so we're already heading into a challenging environment, and there's a lot of TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, right? And people who hate Trump and voted against him, but voted for conservatives down ticket. That did happen here in the state of Maine. And I think that's a real thing. And so I think that doesn't mean that this is completely out of range, but it does mean that if people show up and vote against Republicans because they're mad at Trump, that's going to be challenging. If, a lot of the coalition people, the RFK people and the anti-war people, they may either not show up to vote or show up and vote against Republicans as a statement, against Trump. I mean, the impact of these things is going to be felt here locally, because of the fact that we as a people are far too focused on what's happening in Washington, D.C. and don't recognize the impact that we can have on local politics, unfortunately. So that's real, and it's a real concern, I think.
It hits people in the pocketbook. I mean, the big thing, I thought, was going to be the topic for the midterms was going to be affordability, going to the grocery store, car insurance, price at the pump. As a guy who spends a tremendous amount of time in my car, in my job with the Maine Wire, in driving a lot of places, I mean, it's noticeable. It's noticeable. I'm like, oh, I need gas again. Oh, how much? And it affects everybody. And it affects rich, it affects middle class, it affects poor people. The fact of the matter is, in Maine, you got to drive pretty far to go someplace sometimes. And the Maine has horrible public transportation systems. Horrible. I mean, I'm stupefied by how bad Maine's public transportation is. But even if you're like a gig driver, like an Uber or a Lyft driver, you're feeling pumped. Now, granted, the liberal media wants you to think that the sky is falling and, oh, it's terrible. It's not as bad as it was during the Biden administration yet. And that is the key. I think the key word is yet. I mean, if there are domino effects in the Middle East because of, the bombing that's predicted for tonight, gas could go up to, more than $5 a gallon eventually, which would be devastating for everybody. But I think it would also be devastating for the Republican Party if that happened, because, we were supposed to be talking about affordability. I mean, ridding the world of these bad actors and getting their nukes, I think, is the priority and should be the priority. But, the typical Mainer who has to go to work tomorrow and has to drive, 20, 30 miles, maybe he can't afford to go to work tomorrow because he can't fill up his gas tank. So, I mean, it does have domino effects, and like you said, all politics is local. How does it affect the local Maine economy? And it will have devastating effects on the Maine economy. But then if the straits get opened up and, oil prices go back down, then we can start talking about, the economy and affordability again too. So going to be an interesting 24 hours, Chuck. It really is.
It is. And I think it's hard for us to really fully understand like what I think there's like kind of competing thoughts, right, in my mind. Is like, okay, I do think Iran. So one of the things that I would say is I do think that Iran is a bad actor, and it has historically been a bad actor that has caused a lot of problems. I mean, they've effectively stood up the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. As well as they have attacked, Americans on a number of occasions, and going all the way back to, back 47 years, that they're responsible. I was doing some research for, at the very least, hundreds of thousands of deaths in general through wars, and as well as like the stuff that they've done to their own people. Most recently, killing 40 to 50,000 of them because they protested. Right. So there is, and then there, as you said, there's the nuke question, and I think one of the challenges here, as an elected official, right, is you have to. There's this balance of like you have to do what's right, but you also have to not behave in such a way where you harm you harm your ability to stay in an office, right? Like, so for instance, we have the midterms, right? And if the midterms go poorly, Trump's going to be just facing impeachment trials for 2 years, and nothing is going to get done, right? Which is not good for Trump, is not good for America, is not good for the Republican Party, because it's one of the things that they're already leveling against us, and they constantly level against the Republicans, is that we don't get enough done when we're in office, right? The Republicans are mad at Republicans for not getting enough done, and the Democrats will just look and say, you had control, you could have done what you wanted, and you didn't do it, right? And so this is a constant, claim against the Republican Party. And so here we are. And so you have to ask the question, like, again, somebody like Trump is in this difficult situation where he has to make decisions that are in the best interest of the American people long term, right? Not just short term, but there is this other thing, this short term thing that's in view. And I'll be, Trump, one of the things I said, because I had this conversation to a degree on the Ray Richardson show yesterday, and I think, I am somebody who has historically been attacked by other people on the right for not being pro-Trump enough, and then also attacked by people on the left for being a Trump apologist. And so I'm in this like weird space where like I just try to call it as I see it, and if I think that something is not legitimate, it doesn't make sense to me, I don't agree with it, I'm gonna speak about it, but generally speaking, I've been very thankful for Trump presidency, and I do think that he is different, and I have been looking at this with the hope, right, that this is not just going to turn into Iraq 2.0, and it's not going to be this long war in which we funnel billions and billions of dollars and lose American lives fighting a foreign war for nukes that didn't exist. We don't know, right? Like, or were never close to existing, because like you had the weapons of mass destruction that we never ended up finding in Iraq. And so is this just Iraq 2.0 is the question. This type of action by Trump is unprecedented in his political career. And so, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe there is, he's got a plan and it's going to come to fruition. John, I can't see you, but I can still hear you. Are you there? All right.
Yeah. I can see you. No, you lost me.
Okay. I did. Yeah, but that's all right. As long as you can. All right. Sorry about that, everyone.
Hear you.
Okay. It might be delayed a little bit, John, but I'm going to keep talking. Maybe we'll have you leave and come back. But either way, like this is what Trump has been doing is kind of a little bit unprecedented and so it's hard to like completely trust him and not question and not worry about what happens if things don't work out the way that he wants, and we see these things. And so I'm still hopeful that maybe he's going to turn things around, but I am a little concerned. So John, are you there?
Chuck, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? All right, go for it. Yeah, sorry. I just finished my rant. But all right.
Verizon commercial.
So,
yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think you said. I mean, I agree with everything you said. I mean, but like I said, I mean, I think all we can do as Americans now is wait. Trump has, said that he's going to do what he's going to do, and I mean, I think he has what he says he's going to do. It's going to have devastating effects too. But I mean, I don't know. It's tomorrow morning the world could look a lot different. So have a good day today and enjoy the day today, because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that aside, I mean, again, all that does have an impact on Maine politics, and so that's one of the reasons, because it impacts how people vote, and I think it speaking openly about some of the concerns that do exist there, I think is worth the conversation. So, but talking about what's going on locally, I want to play a clip real quick because I think it's hilarious on the one hand, and also sad. But as we get into the conversation about Janet Mills, let's turn to this clip. And watch that, and hopefully by the time we get back, John will be back. Just to see how wonderful Janet Mills is doing. This is a little cringe, people.
Governor, how do you feel about national party big money being poured into a specific candidate before the state has a chance to have their own primary and make up their own minds? And do you support, along with that, do you support the Maine Democratic Party's neutrality rule?
I respect, go ahead. I respect the neutrality rule. I don't know what big money you're talking to. I don't have the big money here. I don't have big money from the National Party. What are you kidding me?
Right. And by the way, I think your ads are divisive and odious. And you are doing Susan Collins' work for her. However, that's not my question. That is not my question. The state Supreme Court was there, the House was there, the Senate was there. You could not be bothered to walk across the street and join us.
I was at the dentist getting
you never gave a good explanation as to why you snubbed the tribes on that. You said you had a conflict, and we never heard what it was.
I don't just talk the talk. I walk the walk. I've gotten shit done. And I've led us through a terrible pandemic. My commitment and my experience to the United States Senate.
All right. Well, that was a lot of fun. But let's go ahead and
I guess I'm done.
Be done with Janet Mills. So Janet Mills is kind of falling apart, and the Democrat Party seems a little bit upset with her, which is good for us, but not necessarily good for us in the sense that I think there's a lot of concern about Graham Platner potentially coming in and running. So, John, we just played a brief clip from what the Enquirer had put up of Janet Mills zooming into a town hall, and just it was a bit of a cringeworthy moment, one where she tried to claim that she's not receiving big money from outside the state, which is just not true. And also but it was really vicious. They were going after her. It was really interesting. Things are not looking good for good old Janet, in my opinion.
How can Janet Mills say that she's not taking outside money when she is handpicked by Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer is funding her entire, I'll say it, pathetic campaign? I mean, it's fascinating to me that a two-term governor, an incumbent governor, with the power of in the checkbook of the DNC, is losing to Graham Platner by, in some polls, 30%. I mean, I mean, is Janet Mills the worst politician in our lifetime that we've seen? I mean, she's not likable, she's not engaging, she doesn't bring any leadership to the table. Some people will say that she's, done devastating impacts to Maine, especially, in terms of electricity, homelessness, substance abuse. Uh, and she seems like she's going to stay in the campaign. I don't see. I think, have to be fair. I think some of her attack ads on Platner have been pretty good ads. They're not. I don't think they're not for John and Chuck. I think they're more for women. But I think they were pretty good ads. But she hasn't gained any traction because of them. And Platner just. I mean, every day when you call the Virgin Mary a skank, I'm sorry. That is, I do have to judge you on your worst day because, okay, maybe you got drunk and you got tattoos with your buddy. Okay, maybe we can overlook that one. You saying that, people of color don't tip, and that police are bad and rural Mainers are stupid. When do those crows finally come home to roost and say, Platner's not a good guy? He's a good actor, but he's not a good guy. But, option B is to vote for Janet Mills, a horrible politician. So Maine, you've got a Democrat problem. I mean, you really do. I mean, your choice is either bad or really bad. Like, how did you do this to yourself? And if the Republicans don't seize on this, and I know Susan Collins will, but even down ticket. Look at your governor race. You want Shenna Bellows to be your governor? I don't.
Well, yeah, you mentioned that Janet Mills, is she not the worst politician? And my immediate thought was, well, I mean, obviously we could jump to Kamala, but that's another. But locally, you've got, Shenna Bellows, who is just atrocious. She's just a train wreck, waiting to happen, already happened, happening, whatever you want to call it. But she's terrible. And like, what's really interesting, I've been thinking about this, right, is like, given the fact that Janet Mills is not a beloved candidate in the state, so she won both of her elections, right? She won a relatively tight race against Sean Moody, and she won a little bit more handily against LePage, who didn't have the best campaign in 2022, in addition to the fact that part of what was happening was a response to Roe versus Wade being overturned, right? So, but she's won, but it's not because she's overwhelmingly beloved by the American people, by the Maine people, right? And so she's running, and a lot of the problems that we have in our state are as a result of her administration. And so every single Republican candidate, whether they're House, Senate, or gubernatorial, are literally citing her record and what she's done to the state to everybody who will listen. Makes it a little bit challenging for her to run for U.S. Senate when she's literally being talked about as being the problem for everything. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's going to really hurt her ability to win the Democrat primary, in addition to the fact that they just want a younger candidate. Graham Platner, he sounds like really rugged and tough, and he has this really great business where he sold oysters to his mom. Somehow, New York Times thought that was worthy of an op-ed. Somehow, unconnectedly to his race for Senate. Obviously, the New York Times was not colluding, giving him free advertising by creating their kind of picture on him, just demonstrating his incredible oyster farming nature. So good, again, that he could only sell oysters to his mom. But and then as you said, like, you've got a litany of issues that, like, a lot of candidates would be ruined by one of these. And yet he continues to march on, which leads me to believe that people just don't actually care about like the morality of this guy, because they have to know that he is he's problematic. He's got a lot of problems, and by supporting him, they kind of demonstrate that they just actually don't care about racism. They don't care about sexism. They don't care about anti-religious sentiment, whatever it is. Because they'd rather have that than Janet Mills or Susan Collins.
Well, I think I would like to still think the glass is half full, because that's the way I try to kind of look at things every day. But I think that they don't like, the typical voter does not like some of Platner's comments in the comments that he's made in the past. And I still believe that if they had a better candidate other than Platner to run for, they would be then throwing their support behind that better candidate. But what they don't have is, they don't have a better candidate. They have a worse candidate in Janet Mills. So, I think a lot of the oxygen gets pulled out of the room right now on this Platner Mills type thing. But at the end of the day, I still do believe that, Collins will beat Platner. I really do. I mean, we've got to get through the primary, and then we got to get to the general. I think, I still think at the end of the day, Collins, not easily, but does defeat Platner, and his 15 minutes of fame might be up. So, I mean, we will see.
It lies on, the saddest part is it lies on the low information voters. They're the ones that are going to decide this election. It's how it typically works, right? Or unfortunately, in American democracy, what the determining factor in who's actually in power are the people who are the least engaged and involved and understand what's going on. But there is still an opportunity for us to inform those people, have conversations. This is where the Democrats have told us, don't talk about politics in polite society. It's like, well, and then they do, obviously, but we're not supposed to. But that's where we need to have those conversations on our lunch break, at the water cooler, at the at the family barbecue, wherever we find ourselves. We need to be having the conversation about, look, you might not be in love with absolutely everything about so and so, but are they a better option than this other person? It's just a reality, especially when you think about the fact that Susan Collins has has the purse string of the appropriate. She's chair of the appropriations committee, and that brings a lot of business to Maine at a time where Janet Mills is chasing business out of Maine, and so we need that.
Well, one thing you brought up on Shenna Bellows, and I think we have to go back to it a little bit, is, did you see yesterday that the Maine Supreme Court said no, expanding ranked choice voting is unconstitutional? And here's the thing. Shenna Bellows knew that before she started pushing this on people, and the legislators who did vote for it last year knew that it was as well. But this goes back to election integrity in Maine, which is very, very important, because Shenna Bellows potentially could be on the ballot for that election where Graham Platner and Susan Collins are going to be on, and she could be the Democrat nominee for governor, and she's going to oversee that election. Well, she weaponized the ballot by trying to keep President Trump off. She's acknowledged on podcasts that now that she is, certainly not forthright, if not lying about that, illegal aliens are on the voting rolls here in Maine. She's never, and she probably never will, explain the 250 ballots that ended up in Newburgh. Yet the people are supposed to trust her to oversee an election that she could potentially be on the ballot on. I mean, I don't understand where, and if a Republican was on the ballot, run, I would say the same thing, or another Democrat. It's not a personal attack on Shenna Bellows. I can attack Shenna Bellows personally, but this issue is you have to have faith and trust in your elections. And how can you have faith and trust in elections? So somebody who has weaponized the ballot, who has overseen their own election, and find me anybody, and I mean anybody, who really understands ranked choice voting. Because have you seen her try to explain it to people? You can't follow that, so, but she's going to be the person who gets to decide, well, this is what Chuck was deciding, or this is what John was deciding. Ranked choice voting is pathetic. It's dangerous. And there's only one reason it exists. It's to get their agenda passed even more. What happened to voting, one-day elections? You have to vote in person. You vote for the person you want in the job. I mean, they've just watered down our elections. They don't make it safe. And Democrat leaders in the House and Senate, they don't want clean elections right now, because if they did, they'd pass the SAVE Act. And they're
Yeah,
afraid
no,
of it because they know if they pass
absolutely.
it, they probably lose power.
Well, yeah, and there's I think there's definitely a reality there, and yeah, as you said, Shenna Bellows has not given us reason to trust her, right? Even just this last weekend at an event, again, if you're not already, follow the Unquirer on X or Maine X community on Facebook. Great content comes out of there. But she was reiterating that she thinks that it was the right thing to do to keep Trump off the ballot, even though she was overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States. So a lot of the initiatives around elections that she has been involved in, she has had legal challenges that she has essentially lost, right? Whether it's with ranked choice. And as to your point, ranked choice is the biggest problem that I have with ranked choice voting is that nobody understands how it works, Democrat or Republican or other, right? Like people don't know how it works. They don't know how to use it. And there's that other piece where, yeah, we're trusting the Secretary of State. At that point, we take elections away from the towns and the cities. I don't know why, by the way. I don't know why the town can't use the same ballot. Well, no, but I'm just like, but like, there's absolutely no reason, I guess is the way I should put it, that the town shouldn't be able to tabulate using the ballots that are in there. Why should they need to give those ballots to Augusta to be able to count and see, okay, people, your first place vote doesn't count. Where does your second place vote go? And tally them up there. That doesn't make any sense to me. That should not be centralized. The more centralized things become, the more concerning they become. Decentralization is the way to go, which is part of the reason that people bought into crypto before I think it got hijacked by some powerful people. But the idea of decentralization is what we need more of, not centralization of power and authority, but decentralization. And so having the towns being involved in that would be better. But so now not only is it confusing, we don't understand it, but it's, as you said, it's taken over by the Secretary of State's office. And like, she has not given us reason to trust us. She just tells us to trust. And it's like, I'm sorry, but that's just not good enough. I don't, because there are loopholes, and when there are loopholes, people will exploit them. The fact that they're not ensuring that there are no non-citizens on the rolls, let alone voting in elections, is concerning. The fact that she can't tell us what happened to those 250 ballots is concerning. The fact that she thinks that it was the right thing to do to keep the person who the American people ended up electing as president off the ballot because she made the determination that he incited an insurrection. I'm sorry, but you actually don't have the authority to do that. And you want to give people want to give this person more authority. No thanks. I think she and I don't see her entire game plan seems to be, we'll mobilize the radicals in order to try and win the primary. But then again, our best hope, honestly, as conservatives at the governor's race, is that Shenna Bellows would be the candidate that the Democrats put forward, because I think she's the most beatable. She'll definitely get Democrats out to vote, but I think your middle of the road people will see through and are not happy with her, some of the actions and the things that she's done. So, and yeah, as you said, she should not be overseeing her own election. Like, nobody should oversee their own election. That's just unethical. And it doesn't make any sense. One of the things, John, I wanted to spend some time talking about today is like something that we've kind of come up with as I've had some people from time to time reach out to me with things that are happening. But I think there's something that a lot of people don't know about the process that a journalist has to go through in order to be able to vet a story before they can actually produce that story, right? So like there are stories that are out there, some that I'd love to talk to you about today to highlight for you some crazy things that are happening in our society, but I can't because of some of these processes, and how I think we need people who are willing to step forward and actually share what's happening, even in a confidential sense, to give us the ability to then speak about it publicly. Can you explain how that process works to people? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how important that is.
Well, we get a lot of tips, a tremendous amount of tips at the mainewire.com. And please, tips at mainewire.com, send them to us. We'll get them. And then you have to start the process, okay, of calling, reaching out, or, emailing or texting somebody. And you have to validate, the validity of the tip that you're getting right off the bat. Okay. And so you have a conversation, and then you're like, okay, well, can you send me, supporting documentation to this? Well, no, I can't. Okay, well, thanks for the tip. If you get anything more, please keep us in touch. Then if you get supporting documentation, then you've got something that you can run with. But there's three sides to every story. There's the truth, there's your side, and there's my side. So you as a journalist have to fact check things and make sure that things check out. And you have to corroborate that tip that you get as well, too. If you just run with everything that you get and you don't fact check stuff, that's not good journalism. And, there's a big push to, centralized journalism, to run things without fact checking things. And then you have to get what you fact checked, you have to get past an editor, like an editor at the Maine Wire has to say, okay, this makes sense. This is a good story. So, there are a lot of checks and balances that you have to go on. If I wrote an article about every time I got some tip, it would be a pathetic journalism, not even bad journalism. It would be pathetic journalism because, are your tips agenda driven? Are they rumor driven? Are they, hey, I heard a coworker say this driven? We get a lot of that. And, and I'm not saying that some of those things can't turn into stories, that oftentimes, because, the classic saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. If I get somebody calling me about, 3 rumors about Chuck Ellis, well, maybe I'll check into those rumors on Chuck Ellis or something like that. And you start
follow every lead. Follow every lead,
yeah.
Right?
Follow every lead. But you do, they have, at the end of the day, they have to be fact checked. They have to be fact based, and, they have to be credible. And, there is a fine line, for a good journalist to do that, because, we do a lot of investigating journalism at, the Maine Wire. And a lot of our investigations are not, they're not day investigations. They're not week investigations. They could be months. They could be years. You have to get data. You have to fact check it. You have to cross-reference it. Do multiple sources collaborate it? So there is a deep process that goes through it. And and what I'm seeing nowadays in the journalism world is that there's a lot less journalism and there's a lot more stenograph. People just retype other people's stories. They don't do the digging. They don't do the hard questions. And what, at the Maine Wire, we ask the tough questions, and we do the digging, and, sometimes we take some blowback for it as well, too. But at the end of the day, you can't dispute our reporting. So.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, like I said, for people to kind of understand that you guys have to go through a rigorous process before you're actually putting a story out there. And and part of the point that I want to get at here is that, like, the stuff that you guys are reporting is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because there are a lot of real stories that are out there that you can't report on, not because they're not real, but because it requires people to basically take a chance and take on some risk. There's a reality that if there's a situation that only a handful of people know about, right? And one of those people decides to go to the Maine Wire and be a confidential, because that's what it would be, a confidential source. Well, if there are only 4 or 5 people that know about that direct situation, there's a lot of opportunity for blowback to that person, or for them to, and I think that, like, we need more people to be able to take the risk. And if there's information stories that need to be shared to the people of Maine, and so that we know better about, like, some of the things that are going on that, again, a lot of times we're told are not going on. We need people to be willing to take risk and share information. So anyway, I think that's part of the reason people aren't hearing as much. Like, I'd love, as I said, there are a couple of situations where I've got some information that I can't speak about, because even though I'm not working for the Maine Wire, I guess I could. I don't have a boss here. But in order to have my own integrity And
Right.
I'm kind of trying to keep myself to a similar standard, because last thing I want to do is go out and say that this thing is happening, and then something comes out, and number one, I didn't have permission from somebody to share something, and they get blowback as a result of it. I don't want that on my conscience. I'm only going to do that if they're willing, they're willing to share confidentially or other. But there are stories that have come to my attention that are like real things that are happening that I really wish that we could get, but we need people to be willing to kind of be those confidential sources. So if you know things that are going on, reach out to John. There, he's a busy guy, but he'll make time for stories that we need to hear. So anyway, that's as close to getting myself in trouble as I'll get on those topics. But yeah, like I said, I think it's important for people to understand that, and yeah. So
it's great. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, because it is an important piece, and the Maine Wire will never give up a confidential source. We never will. We'll even go to court over it. We'll never give up a controversial source, and protecting people's identity and validating the accuracy of the story are cornerstones of what make the Maine Wire successful. So, yep. But it does take people, to number one, reach out, and then, a lot of and I've had this conversation many, many times with people over the years. Somebody will reach out, will call me or text or send an email or something, and then we'll have a conversation, and then, well, you're not going to report that, are you? Well, why did you call? Because a lot of times people will then get like cold feet, like, whoa, wait a minute, you didn't get that from me, and I'm like, okay, like we don't have to go forward, but I do need permission to go forward, because we will report it, and a lot of times people forget nowadays when you put something up on social media or Facebook, it can be used in news, it can be, so but
yeah,
people need to be aware of that sometimes. Yeah.
We do. Yep. So, well, yeah, I mean, thank you for everything that you're doing again at the Maine Wire, to you and the rest of the team at the Maine Wire to kind of uncover fraud, and anything else that's happening, here in our state that the people of Maine need to be informed about, that the mainstream media, as I am fond of saying, has become a propaganda arm of the Democrat Party. It doesn't seem interested in reporting on real news that's actually happening. They're doing lazy journalism. They're not doing investigative journalism, which is what you guys are doing, which I think is really great. And yeah, so thank you guys for everything that you're doing over there. Any other things that you wanted to talk about? I'm trying to think if there's the legislature. I think you might want to. You had made some comments about the dysfunction of the legislature, so I think it's worth going there. They did their normal thing where they don't want to pass a bipartisan budget or whatever, not budget, but so they have to do but with budget increases and whatnot. So they did their sign a die. I don't really know what that is exactly, but they closed early and then come back for emergency session, right? They did that again this year.
Yeah, I mean, because they've got some outrageous spending in there. The big thing that people should be concerned about is the millionaires tax that they snuck in there, which is one lawmaker said to me, "Well, it's not a tax; it's a surcharge." Okay, explain to me the difference between a tax and a surcharge. Like okay, it's a tax is a tax, and a surcharge is a surcharge. And a lot of people watching this go, "Oh, well, I'm not a millionaire; it doesn't affect me." But if you're a small business owner and you have $1 million worth of revenue, which hopefully you do, you're going to pay that surcharge too. This is the classic Democrat, initiative. Well, we're going to tax the millionaires and give it to, our what we deem as our worthy projects. Well, you know what millionaires can do? They can choose not to live in Maine. Millionaires can afford to move out of Maine. Millionaires can afford to move their businesses out of Maine. And all you have to do is look a couple miles south of the Maine border and look at Massachusetts. Massachusetts passed a millionaire's tax 2 years ago. They probably regret it now because the millionaires packed up and left. And when they packed up and left, they left, with their business in tow. They left, their shopping. They left their dining. and all of that revenue that was, generated by a meals tax or a hotel tax or a tourism tax, that all left too. And it also has effects like on your sports teams, like the Celtics, like the Patriots, the Red Sox, the Bruins. You're a free agent. You're going to go to Maine and pay an extra 2% of your income when you can go to Florida and get the same amount of money and keep that 2%, that 3% tax. No, this is foolish. This is penny wise and dollar foolish what the legislature just did in the middle of the night here, because it's going to take 2 or 3 years to have impacts. But when it does have the impacts and people are going to wake up and go, what happened to all the money? Well, it moved, because the biggest problem in Maine right now is most Mainers can't afford to live here, but they also can't afford to leave here because it's expensive to move. But if you're a millionaire, you can absorb that cost and you can move. I just can't believe that there wasn't more scrutiny on this one. Also, the flock cameras that are now showing up all across Maine, and you're being surveilled. And I'm one of those guys. Well, if your life is as pathetic as it is you want to record me and videotape me, good. Hopefully, I'm not doing anything wrong. But there was no public discussion about these flock cameras being installed on, major roadways. There was no public discussion. They just did it. So Big Brother is watching you, and you're probably not aware of it. So I would strongly encourage people to go to themainewire.com and read our story about the flock cameras. And then I think this might be the icing on top of the cake. Is the state Senate yesterday on a party line, Democrat versus Republican line. The Democrats want you to pay for their personal home security system. It's only $450,000. But why do you as a taxpayer have to pay for somebody who chose to be a legislature's home security system? Like, what are we doing here? Like, what are you doing? Like, name me the incident one that prompted this story. It was from a state senator out of Falmouth, who you would think if you live in Falmouth, you could afford your own home security system. But why should the average taxpayer pay for your home security system for a job that you chose to do by yourself, that most importantly, you represent people that you probably don't always agree with? Like that's your job, is to represent all of the people. Not the people who support you, not the people who vote for you, not the people who you have at your fundraising event. Everybody. And now the taxpayer is supposed to pay for your home security system. You chose to run for office. Pay for your own security system.
Yeah,
now,
I mean,
if somebody's being harassed or being bothered by somebody, I want to be perfectly clear. That's unacceptable. That's bad behavior. And that's why you call the police department and let the police do their job. But I don't think Chuck and John should have to pay for, a state rep or a state senator's home security system. Then don't be a state senator. Don't be a state rep.
Well, what I mean, I can't imagine like what's happening that is leading to this, but like I think part of the problem that we have here in the state of Maine, like what are you doing that you're afraid that somebody's going to come and do something to you for what you're doing? I'm not interested in fear tactics. We should not be doing anything that's going to cause people, but like at the same time, like part of my question becomes like, what are you doing that is causing people to be that angry at you, number one? But the other point is like, again, like what are we going to do next? It's going to be hiring personal security for these state reps. Like I think it's nonsense. It's definitely not something that the Maine people should be paying for, on top of all the other spending that the Democrats are doing. Again, like they're so out of control in spending that they need to do this additional tax on millionaires or people who are making $1 million in a year. The surcharge, I guess, which is just another.
I think if you polled the average Mainer, and said, "Who is your state senator?" Unfortunately, probably 60 to 70% of the people you polled, they wouldn't know. I think you're
being generous. I think we're looking at 80, 85%. People do not know.
No, and I mean, to me, that's probably good. I mean, good and bad. I mean, just because one or two people are attacking you on Facebook, Well, you kind of signed up for that when you took the job. I'm not saying that anybody should ever be harassed or anybody should ever be bullied or threatened with violence. 100%, I'm not saying that. But I also just don't think you chose to be in that job. And if if that job has become dangerous, call the police or end your term and don't run for re-election or something like that. But
or pay for your own home security system. Like
pay
if
for
that's
your own, like everybody else does.
I don't understand why why that's the job of we already increased the amount of money that we pay legislators from I think it was I don't know, I think we nearly doubled what we paid them, because I think it was I don't know, $26,000 over the course of 2 years, and now it's $45,000. So we've already don't quote me 100% on that, but it's somewhere around there. We had a substantial increase that we gave them. Okay, now you're making more money. Go ahead and use the money that we're paying you to put this in already, if that's what you want. But yeah, I don't think it's. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But again, they're
and once again, no transparency on it. No transparency on it. I mean, if there is a legitimate reason why it's a topic to be discussed, well, then let's just discuss it. But if I hadn't told you about it, would you even know about it?
No.
So.
Well, this is something I was actually thinking. I'm glad that we're talking about the legislature. It's I'm engaged in the political process. I'm paying attention to social media. I'm interviewing people. Now, I haven't interviewed many sitting legislators this cycle, which I probably need to do. But part of me feels a little bad for how busy they are. But I need to have some of them come on. But the truth is, I'm not hearing a lot of what's going on in Augusta. And I think this is one of the problems that we have in our system is if I'm actively paying attention to what's happening with why is it that this is that our political process is such that so much is happening without the Maine people, including myself, seeing and hearing about all the different things that are happening. I think the thing that people heard the most about was the thing that wasn't happening, which was the lawnmower tax, that funny thing that went around, the fake, not real lawnmower tax. But I think people heard more about that than they did about the actual stuff that they're doing in Augusta. Again, this millionaire tax is one that I have heard a little bit about. I hadn't heard about the home security system, but yeah, it's a little bit crazy.
That goes back to the media though, Chuck. I mean, the mainstream media doesn't cover a lot of the stuff going on in Augusta. The death of local newspapers. You don't hear about stuff, because things start on the local level and then go to the state level. There are no, or very low local newspapers anymore. And in the mainstream media, prints press releases. They don't do the investigative. They don't learn the devils of the details of some of these bills. And that's what you get, and you've got controlled media in Maine. The Bangor Daily News takes money from the Mills administration, $2.4 million from the Mills administration. Do you think they're going to say anything bad about the Mills administration? The Portland Press Herald, you find out who owns them. I mean, they've got a political agenda. So they don't sometimes, if the media doesn't report something, that's bigger news than if they do report it, because they don't want you to know what's going on in Augusta.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly it. I mean, the reality is they want you to be focused on what we spent probably too much time talking about at the beginning, is what's going on in Washington, D.C. They don't want you paying attention to what's happening in your backyard, in Augusta, in your towns, and that's why they're not reporting on these real things, that are happening. So I appreciate what you guys are doing, bringing to light some of these things. I need to get I should probably get some legislators here on the podcast in the near future.
There you go.
Let's keep trying to get the information out in front of the people. And I think that's unless you have anything else for the people before we head off for this week.
Well, enjoy the day. Like I said, unfortunately, tomorrow the world might look a little bit different with Iran and the Trump administration. But always enjoy coming on the Muddy Waters podcast. Always enjoy talking to you, Chuck. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And thank you all for watching. We'll be back here on Friday. We have a parent who shared at a school board meeting a while back about something that was again, one of those things that they try to tell us is not actually happening. But you know, an organization was basically having kids talk about their sexting and things like that without parental knowledge. And so she's going to share her story as a mom, uncovering that was happening. That like what happened as a result. So we'll be back here on